So in the news, there's been so much information about what's going on in the immigration world, and so much focus on mass deportations and all of this really deeply troubling things that are coming out of the current administration, and a real enforcement focus with the Department of Homeland Security. But I think one positive thing that might come out of this is a focus on our failing and broken immigration system. That there started to be new conversations in Congress and in the public about what immigration really looks like, what legal immigration looks like today. And that, what it looks like, that process is something that's remained largely unchanged for almost 30 years. And so if you think about it, if we're basing our system on rules and quotas that we set in 1990, of course that's not working today, right? We wouldn't run a business based on the policies or the expectations we set that long ago. So much has changed since then. And I think really the fact that we haven't changed our system is part of the reason why there is illegal immigration, why there are people desperate to come here, because they can't get here any other way, or because the paths that do exist are so restrictive or result in these backlogs and wait times that can last 3, 4, 7, 10, 13 plus years. And so with a system that broken, I think that needs to be the place where we start. And it's a way of addressing all the concerns about border security and also about illegal immigration if we start at the beginning with that process.
Alicia, can you tell us a little bit about what is expedited removal?
Sure. So that term has been in the news a lot recently with the sort of the proposed expansion of its use in some of these executive orders coming from the current administration. In the past, expedited removal was used primarily at borders and ports of entry. It was a tool that CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol, or ICE, all the sort of enforcement arms of DHS would use to immediately deport individuals attempting to enter the U.S. or who had successfully entered the U.S. without permission to do so. And it was a way to do it without affording that individual the ability to see an immigration judge or fight that deportation. And so it was, again, predominantly used with folks along the border trying to enter and then immediately being turned around and deported. Currently, some of these executive orders have proposed expanding the use of it to anyone in any part of the United States who's been here less than 2 years. And there are a lot of problems with that. It's creating a lot of fear in our communities, but also the idea of systematically deporting folks without affording them due process, without giving them the opportunity to see an immigration judge to make a case for forms of relief that they may actually be eligible for, is deeply troubling, as well as creating all of this fear in all of our immigrant and especially undocumented communities.
And lastly, can you tell us about the rights that any individual inside of our borders has?
Sure. So here in the U.S., regardless of your immigration status, you do have certain really important rights. You are protected by our Constitution, which means that you have the right to due process. You should have the right to see an immigration judge, to be in a process before you're just deported, forced to leave the United States. You also have really important rights when it comes to interactions with law enforcement, that you have those rights of privacy, that law enforcement can't just, in general, enter your home without permission to do so or without a warrant to do so. And so undocumented immigrants need to know this, that ICE cannot just demand entry into a home without a warrant signed by a judge, and they're typically not going to have that. They need permission to enter, and if they're entering without permission, that's inappropriate, and we need to call attention to that. Finally, undocumented individuals, regardless of their status, have the right to get help from our local law enforcement, from state law enforcement, in the event that they're being victimized or being targeted by criminals. We see all too often how individuals, particularly undocumented individuals, become victims of serious crimes, in part because they're so terrified of coming forward, of even calling the police. We have clients who are not seeking protective orders, who are letting their protective orders lapse, who, again, aren't calling 911, aren't calling the police because they're so fearful that they're the ones who are going to be arrested and deported. And part of that is being validated by what's coming from the White House and some of the political rhetoric as well. But what remains true, at least here in Connecticut, is that an individual has the right to call the police, to seek the protection of our local courts if they're the victims of a crime.
Thank you so much. Alicia Kinsman is the Director and Managing Attorney for IICONN's Immigration Legal Services.
Thanks.